AI, in the travel game we go. Got that AI on the low, taking flights to and fro, booking trips in a snap with a simple chatbot flow. AI, revolutionizing how we roll. Gonna hop on a plane.
Welcome to another episode of the Everything AI in Travel podcast, where we hear from the makers, shapers, and buyers of AI technology in the travel space. Here's your host, Tony Khan.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Everything AI in Travel podcast. And today we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the recent announcement by Airbnb about their move into services. And today I've got with me a guest who I've known for quite some time, Luke Bujarski. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tony. My pleasure is mine.
Brilliant. So we know each other from back in the day. You were previously a researcher, both with Phocuswright and Skift, so the two biggest names in research in the travel game. So great pedigree there. And then you moved, somewhat surprisingly for a researcher, I guess, into becoming a practitioner. So tell us a little bit about what's been going on since you moved out of the research game.
Yeah, so out of the research game, I suppose, you always have to kind of stay on top of what's happening in the industry, right? Perhaps even, more so as a quote unquote practitioner. Within research, it was always a matter of kind of growing the research team, being in the business of building teams. And that position just gave me a fantastic just kind of perspective on where the industry is headed. And I wanted to just kind of capitalize on that entrepreneurial route. And in 2020, we launched Extenteam, which is a workforce solutions company dedicated to the vacation rental, short-term rental ecosystem, primarily as a kind of a staffing company. We've since kind of pivoted that company into more of a solutions brand. And now we've launched Jethire, which is a division of Extenteam as a pure recruitment executive search firm, helping founders, business leaders, primarily within the travel and hospitality industry, as well as kind of adjacent verticals that make sense now that some of these silos are starting to break down. Basically, to help them manage that whole talent acquisition process, to help them find the people that they need to build and to execute on that strategic vision. So it's been a heck of a ride the last 5 years, for sure.
The timing there is interesting. So 2020, I believe, like travel wasn't going too well in 2020. So it's an interesting time to start up a business. Like, what was the thinking behind that? And like, how were those first couple of years, given that we were deep in COVID and there wasn't a lot of travel happening? Or maybe because you're US based, there was still quite some domestic travel happening and it maybe wasn't such a big deal in the short-term rental industry.
You know what? It was actually like the perfect time to do what we did with Extenteam, because there was this almost like perfect storm where you had all of these like people like exiting large cities into these smaller mountain, beach and town destinations. If you remember, people going on like extensive sabbaticals, just looking for an escape zone out of the big cities. So all those markets, in terms of like the Branson, Missouris of the world, just absolutely exploded in demand in terms of short-term vacation rental inventory and demand there. And what they didn't have were people to actually help them manage that tremendous influx in demand. So a big part of what we did was basically help them offshore a lot of that work in terms of the guest services and communications work, aligning them with basically resources in the Philippines as well as in Latin America to help manage calls, to help answer emails, to basically help them run that ship. So it was almost like a perfect storm, and it actually grew tremendously. Now I think we're starting to see a little bit of more of like, I don't want to say like reshoring, because I mean, it's a global workforce right now. It's pretty wild, and companies are very much, of all sizes, are very much taking advantage of that. But I think as the labor market shifts and changes, we're definitely seeing, you've heard it, right? Like the return to work, back to the office, that there's obviously nuance there, but a lot of the skills that companies need are very much kind of embedded in with local markets, I would say. So some of that is starting to come back. And part of what we're doing with Jethire is to really focus on more stateside recruitment, even though, global is, you have to think global when it comes to building teams these days. So anyways, long answer to your question is that it was kind of like a perfect storm. And now things continue to evolve, right? I mean, it's a crazy time right now to be, in knowledge work in general, right?
For sure. And the services that you're providing there, particularly in terms of customer service and customer support, are the types of things that, probably most easily replicated by AI. And an area where a lot of travel companies have begun their AI journey is either, pairing their human workers with AI co-pilots to get information more quickly, or, in the case of, the company that we're going to have a chat about, Airbnb, have been, the one thing that they have spoken a lot about in terms of AI is how much AI they're using in their customer service and how it's reduced their headcount and, increased their output to those that are looking for information from Airbnb. Although you look online, maybe there's not a lot of satisfied customers out there receiving that support, but how's that all played into kind of your business mix, and were you working with property managers or individual hosts or both, and how did that all play out?
Yeah, so on the Extenteam side, that is definitely much more targeted towards professional property management groups with larger management portfolios. And yeah, to a certain extent, well, absolutely, customer interactions have very much changed. A lot of that has come from just what the customer wants, right? Rather than picking up a phone, they would much rather have a digital chat or email information to them, or have that readily available before the question even pops up. So AI is definitely a natural fit for that in terms of presenting that information. With Jethire, we're more focused on kind of mid to senior level roles, individuals that can actually kind of like, help shape company outcomes. And it's, I mean, the automation in terms of jobs is, there's two kind of like, it's like a tale of two cities, right? There's obviously a lot of like the doom and gloom about AI just killing all the jobs. And then there's the other side where they're talking about all these new jobs that AI is going to create. And now companies are kind of stuck in the middle, looking for people, not only like AI developers or heavy tech savvy people, but more of like individuals that have the capacity to kind of be critical thinkers and just to help get stuff done at the company with, like, I don't want to say limited supervision, but just work work independently to help companies grow, which is surprisingly hard to find. And I'm not, it's not by no, like, it's not meant to be an insult, but it's just the companies do struggle to find individuals, even though you might get 200, 300 resumes that you need to parse through. You have to do your diligence in terms of just, doing your homework, making sure that the individuals that you do bring on will actually be able to add value, particularly now, and being able to leverage tools to do the research, and, rather than asking for solutions, like bringing solutions. So it's a very different landscape right now, I would say.
For sure, there's a real needle in a haystack type element to it all, and LinkedIn, for all the good things that it provides, and it has its own job section and whatever, but it has made it very simple for anybody to basically apply for a job by clicking an apply now button, and your application goes in based on your LinkedIn profile with not a lot of other context, which is just an absolute nightmare for the hiring manager. And we've actually done an episode in the past with a founder of Sapia.ai, Barb Hyman, who is really rethinking the whole hiring process, and has a couple of large hospitality customers. So if people are kind of interested in that, I also recommend they go and check out that episode to see a totally different way that hiring can be done. That's, miles away from sending in resumes, etc. Now, your foot in the STR world, or the short-term rental world, is kind of what caught my attention, why I thought you'd be a good guest to bring on to talk about what Airbnb have released in the last week, with the services platform to go alongside their accommodation suite, the relaunch of experiences. And you actually put out a post that caught my eye, that brought in the subject of AI and how they've been able to potentially pivot their business or reposition their business using AI, and what that might have meant in terms of timeframes. And certainly love to get your thoughts on that. But just to set the scene, you posted a clip from CNBC, I think it was, of Brian getting interviewed, and typical Brian Chesky, he's just a masterclass in communication. Love him or hate him, he's just absolute brilliant at the way that he communicates about his business. And in that particular interview, he set the scene by saying Amazon is the place where you can get anything in a box. And what he wants Airbnb to be is where you can get everything else that doesn't come in a box, i.e. experiences and services, which I thought was kind of a brilliant reframing of the opportunity for Airbnb, which did match what they're kind of bringing out here, in that you can get services to come to your home, and you can get a haircut, or a chef to come and cook for you, or these things that are not necessarily holiday driven. And so that's kind of the product, and that's what they've released. And there's a lot of mixed feelings out there, but I think if you kind of think of it in that way, that if that's the opportunity that they're going after, is like the own the experience economy, then it's a whole different thing to hospitality. But your main point was around how they may have leveraged AI to do this pivot. So tell us what your thoughts were there.
Yeah, like I said, I've been out of the research game for a while, so less of the why they did this, or whether or not it was like a good idea to go down this road, isn't necessarily my cup of tea anymore, but rather the how, in terms of like how they were actually able to do this from a rollout perspective. And the assumption has to be that they used generative AI as an integral part of this whole transformational journey, in terms of everything from code automation to content development to the A/B testing, to all of the kind of the strategic facilitation that generative AI is so good at doing, in order to cut down the time and cost that it took to actually get this out the door. So the question becomes, like, how much time did they actually save by using generative AI to do this? And would they have gone down this road in terms of like launching the services hub, which is probably the biggest part of this whole transformation, if this had been like, let's say 2018 or something like that, right? So I did have like a kind of a deep dive conversation with ChatGPT about this, kind of architecting like what a hypothetical rollout of this size would actually entail, in terms of the roles that the company likely had to leverage in order to get this done, and how much time they were able to actually save across all those different roles. And like all in all, basically, came back to 30 to 50% time savings on this role. So basically taking a project that would have taken 4 years to execute on, and moving that timeline, shortening that timeline to a year and a half, or year to 2 years. I'm not sure that's what Brian said, but whether it was a year or 2 years, I don't know, it's kind of a big window. But nevertheless, like, we have to assume that there was significant time savings on that front in terms of the actual rollout, but also in terms of actually managing the product itself, right? Post rollout, because this is only the beginning, like Brian said, right? So in terms of aggregating new inventory, managing all the supplier expectations, all that stuff is going to be a tremendous lift if they want to actually scale this up. How much will AI, help them to do that, is kind of my question, right?
Yeah,
which I think is significant. Yeah,
totally. And they've been quite unbelievably restrained in the way that they have not launched consumer-facing AI, like in my opinion, because Brian loves magic, right? He talks about it all the time. He's a big fan of Disney, and again, going back to his communication, one of the most brilliant things I think I've seen in 15 years, or the past 15 years in travel, was him talking about what the 15-star experience might look like, and taking us through what's a 5-star experience, and moving all the way up to the sublime and ridiculous, and then bringing it back down to a 7, 8, or 9, which is actually might be achievable. And even back then, probably didn't seem overly achievable, but in the generative AI world, it's now becoming much more possible to have these experiences that go well beyond what we thought was comprehensible in the past, and particularly around personalizing it for each individual. And I see this services rollout as a step towards bringing that kind of experience, that personalized experience, alive. And I'm sure they have data around which types of experiences people really want when they're on their vacation, that can then add up to this very individual 7, 8, 9-star experience. So that's kind of one part of what they're doing. And then the other part is like reframing it as this huge opportunity to be the Amazon of experiences, which I think is, again, brilliant. But their restraint in terms of what they put out in terms of consumer facing, they were very quick to move and bring someone from with incredible AI credentials onto their board, and then to not jump into what everyone else was seeing as magic, like the launch of ChatGPT and the ability to just get answers, without having to click through 28 different sites. So what are your thoughts there? And do you have any crystal ball gazing as to how that might mature into, the Google I/O was on yesterday, and they're now, redefining what their interface looks like. What are your thoughts on this, and how might it look for STRs, and particularly the king of STRs, which is Airbnb?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Tony. I think that Airbnb is the brand to do it, right? I feel like I know that it gets a lot of flack from within the industry, particularly from the supplier community, but net in terms of consumer, brand, Airbnb is a very strong and positive kind of positioning. And from whether or not they're able to execute on it, I think that trust level is huge when it comes to, hey, okay, it's not just stays, but we can also find other things to do there. And obviously they have the consumer, the volume there to make that happen. I also wonder whether or not this was almost like, whether this was like an opportunistic move on the part of Brian and team, or whether or not it was more of like an imperative, like, let's get here first before somebody else does, because it's like, yeah, Amazon doesn't have services, although they do have the telemedicine service, so it's not necessarily entirely true. And whether or not Amazon would be the right company to do that, like, Airbnb is not going to be the only one that's going to be coming out with these bold, big announcements, moves, new product launches. Like the investor community is almost expecting this, right? Like if you look at what OpenAI is doing and Google is doing and Tesla is doing in terms of it's just a whirlwind of new launches and updates, AI-driven updates. It's almost like now, like up to some of the incumbent travel, the large travel companies to really start to innovate as well in terms of these product launches. So it's almost like an expectation from the market. And this is my pure just, assumptions that like they're under some pressure to like not only just stay in their lane, but now like do new stuff, right? Succeed or fail, like get some stuff out there, because there's just a lot, there's it's almost like a wild west now, where like with the enhancements, efficiency or operational enhancements, that makes it easier for these companies to launch new products, new cool products, bigger, better, faster. There's also the imperative to kind of come up with new stuff from like a shareholder perspective. So I'm not entirely surprised that Airbnb did that. I think, whether or not it's going to be a success is like a different story. We'll have to see. But, kudos to the team for sure for getting it out the door. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
for sure. And do you have any insights from your time with Extenteam and your insights into the STR world as to whether Airbnb might have been topping out in that market? Like, had they kind of got as much as they could possibly get, or I mean, because they always say, oh, we're only a small percentage of the market and whatever, giving the illusion that, there's a lot more to go. But is the lemon worth the squeeze? Like, it is getting,
Right.
extra little bits here and there where you only get a few bookings every so often. Is that really worth it? Or is there a better opportunity to go after it? That's kind of one thought I have around it. And, obviously now that they're a public company, the ability to innovate in some ways becomes more difficult because shareholders want to extract value. They want a return on their investment, which means, some of the money needs to go to them. And it's not as easy just to bring in a big pile of new money like they did as they were growing up and, getting the $1 billion, chunks of money in to go to the next level. So what are your thoughts there? Do you think they're topping
Yeah.
out is it AI that's maybe driving some commercial efficiencies inside that's freeing up some capital to do this innovation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, if you can look at the Booking example, Booking has been crushing it with short-term rentals of late, seeing tremendous gains within that category of accommodation. And they're more like sticking to their guns, right? And really just focusing on accommodations. They're not, zigging, zagging, doing, anything, beyond that. But Airbnb is, whether or not they're topping out on, I think the hotels have been very much in large part heavily back from the COVID time, which was definitely a golden age for short-term rentals, non-city, non-urban market, short-term rental market was like the big one. And now that a lot of the travels come back to the big cities, hotels are naturally well positioned for that type of a traveler, just because, part of it is not just cost or like price sensitivity on the customer. It's just a great experience too, to be at a hotel, to have the lobby, to be, and hotels have been doing a fantastic job too in terms of guest experience. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's a ton of competition, and both direct and indirect competition coming at Airbnb. And I think maybe also, like you said, a lot of those operational efficiencies. And Mark Mahaney, actually, the analyst, had a great point during the Phocuswright conference last November, and basically said that AI is only going to make some of these companies stronger. It's going to let them do things better, faster, cheaper. And maybe that's a part of that with Airbnb is, as a result of that, right? They've just been super efficient in terms of their operations, and they said, why not? Let's do it. Let's try it. So
yeah, for sure. And what inspiration are you taking from these takeaways of, driving extra efficiency by, leveraging AI in the way that we presume Airbnb have here to, restrict that timeline on a rollout for your own businesses like Extenteam or Jethire? Are you in the weeds now yourself with AI on how you can build out your own operational efficiency? Is that kind of how you're looking at things, and is that why this is of interest to you, or why else is this a subject that you feel so passionate about?
Yeah, I think we as a recruitment firm, we need to stay ahead of, like, both for our success to make sure that we are aware of the types of roles that companies are going to need, whether. And we don't touch like the tech roles, like the tech heavy, like sourcing and vetting is like a whole nother beast. The area that I'm more interested in is more on the customer side. So kind of classic go-to market roles in marketing and sales, business development. for new customer acquisition. And then on the other side, more on like the product-led growth hires, so customer success, product management, life cycle marketing, those individuals that are really more focused on actually retaining customers, right? And growing customer lifetime value. So it's kind of coming from two sides, right? That's where I think is the opportunity for both like companies to just to get better at, because with all of these new innovations coming out, all these new companies, products, I mean, customer eyeballs are going cross-eyed from too many options, right? What that means is that customer acquisition costs are just going to start going up, right? So I think that companies are really going to need to invest in top talent that it can bring in new customers, creative geniuses, branding experts, marketing, full stack marketers that can like really lead the charge in terms of new customer acquisition, also like product geniuses that can like help them build new products, not necessarily like the coding, even though, you know, obviously it's part of it, but like the vision part of it. And that's just what, you know, we love to do, is just help companies grow. From our perspective, in terms of recruitment, it's a very involved process. Clearly, AI is helping to facilitate some of that, but there is a lot of like, you know, stuff coming out like AI recruiters, excuse me, AI recruitment firms, where it's just like the chatbot, like, you know, kind of taking over and doing the full cycle recruitment process. I think that's still very much a ways away. It's every company is different. There's that strategic element in terms of like helping the company actually optimize for the role, not to mention actually, you know, getting candidates in the door, screening those candidates, vetting those candidates, and then making sure that the top candidates have an amazing experience, right? Because a big part, like people assume that like the first impression starts on day one, but it's actually like your employer brand and the impact that has on your workers' productivity is going to start from the second that person applies for the job, right? So that whole process needs to be nailed down very tight, and it's very nuanced. I'm not saying that AI won't one day like automate just like everything else, right? Automate that process, but you know, there's still a ton of need to actually help manage that. And you know, it's, for me, I think it's just great to be able to put people with companies and actually, you know, have that succeed is just, it's great, you know, to check in on folk that we've placed and they're happy, the client's happy. It's a great feeling.
For sure. And yeah, AI is coming for us all. Expect this podcast to one day not have me here, like I'll have somebody like, you know, just an avatar that will do all the work here and go out and find people. But in terms of Jethire itself, are you like more of a headhunter type agency where somebody will give you a brief and you'll go out and try and source those candidates, the best candidate out there? Or are you put the ad out, get the ad as wide and far as you possibly can, get all the inbound, sort through it? Or is it a mix of both? And that's kind of one part of the question. And then the other thought I had was, we hear that the US is kind of in a bit of a downturn for reasons that probably could have been controlled. But, you know, what's that meaning for the hiring market right now?
Yeah. So in terms of sourcing, it's a little bit of both. It really kind of depends on the role. Higher level positions require what's more called kind of passive sourcing methods, which is more outreach, like actually reaching out to people or finding people that you think might be a good fit, and understanding where those people are within their career journey. Just as a very simple example, if they just started a job, you know, you're gonna engage them. If they just started at 3 months ago, they just started a new role, is the likelihood of them actually wanting to make the switch is not probably a great target for that. So there are tools out there to help you identify individuals that could be a good fit for that. So there's a lot of that passive recruitment. Job posts are obviously very relevant. LinkedIn is great. There are a lot of kind of niche job boards. So every time like a new role comes on, like we have our go-tos, but like there are like niche job boards that you have to kind of consider or you can leverage to get strong applicants. But a lot of times the top people aren't necessarily looking at job boards, right? They're happy where they're at, or they are using their own internal networks to actually find their next big opportunity. And that's like a huge part of that is what's called the hidden job market. And that's exactly what it is. I think I want to say over 50% of jobs that get filled are actually either filled internally or are filled by people within a network, like a referral network, right? So we help companies with that, like as kind of the default referral company. And with regards to the US market, I think that, again, it's kind of the tale of two cities, right? Like there's a lot of fear mongering. Obviously, the tech layoffs are are still very much in the news. I think the latest one is like TikTok is now saying that they're going to lay off some US based workers. Obviously Microsoft had a big cut. So shorter term, I would probably expect, like a softening of the job market for sure. But again, it's like good people are hard to find, and companies they're letting people go, but they're always hiring. So it's, how it goes. Things change quickly. I think that nobody has the answer, right? I think that AI is going to create a lot of jobs, but it's also going to create a lot of jobs that are like hard to fill, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
For sure. Hey, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so thank you so much for taking some time to have a chat with me today. Now, if people have liked what they've heard, if they're thinking about recruiting in the near future, or they're looking for a new position, actually, I did have an idea a long time ago about, a platform where people could input what it would take for them to move. So talking about that hidden job market, often you're very comfortable where you are, but like, what would it take you to move? Is it an extra 10 grand? Is it an extra step up in responsibility? And I thought that would be an interesting database to have. And I think people would also be willing to kind of, put out there what it is that might make them a headhunter contact. So maybe we can talk about that another time, Luke. But if people wanted to catch up with you, how can they best find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Find me on LinkedIn or send us a note via jethire.co. We have obviously reach out to the contact us form for employers. And we also have what we're calling the engagement letter, which is on the website for individuals that are looking for new opportunities. So we're building up a great database of talent within travel and hospitality and adjacent verticals. As these kind of silos start to merge, we're helping people find opportunities across different industries as well through the engagement letter. And then we'll be releasing more information about that, or, kind of publicizing that. But that will, so if that's definitely a great resource for job seekers. And if you're a founder, company, business leader, and need help with managing that process, just feel free to reach out. I'd love to have a chat, at least, if anything, just to get a better sense of where you are on your growth journey. So perfect. I appreciate the time, Tony.
Too easy, mate. Thank you so much for taking some time to have a chat with us. That's it for another one of the Everything AI and Travel podcasts. Look out for the next one, and we look forward to talking to you all on that one. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
AI, in the travel game we go. Got that AI on the low, taking flights to and fro, booking trips in a snap with a simple chat.